The United States has always played a complex role in African diplomacy, but recent moves have sparked renewed discussion on the true intentions behind its foreign policy. When former President Trump recalled several ambassadors from African nations, it immediately raised eyebrows among political analysts, journalists, and citizens alike. On the surface, the recall might seem like a routine diplomatic reshuffle, a standard procedure to realign priorities or respond to administrative changes. But a deeper look reveals a far more intricate picture, one that intertwines politics, economic interests, and the delicate balance of power on the African continent. For decades, the United States has maintained a strategic presence across Africa, from embassies in major capitals to active participation in peacekeeping missions. These ambassadors have not just been ceremonial representatives. They have acted as pivotal intermediaries in trade negotiations, security cooperation, and even humanitarian initiatives. The sudden recall of these diplomats, many of whom had established long-term relationships with local governments, communities, and regional organizations, sent a ripple of uncertainty through both African capitals and U.S. foreign policy circles. Analysts have pointed out that the timing of these recalls was particularly striking. Many of the ambassadors were deeply involved in ongoing trade agreements, development programs, and anti-terrorism initiatives. Their abrupt departure disrupted communication channels and left a temporary void in U.S. engagement with critical regions. This raises an important question. Was this move purely administrative, or did it reflect a broader shift in how the United States intends to exercise influence in Africa? Beyond the immediate disruption, the recalls can also be interpreted through the lens of political signaling. In international relations, the appointment or removal of ambassadors often conveys a message as powerful as formal policy statements. By recalling these ambassadors, the Trump administration may have been signaling dissatisfaction with the pace or direction of certain diplomatic efforts, asserting a new level of oversight, or even recalibrating the focus of U.S. resources on specific regions deemed more critical. Every action in diplomacy, particularly at this high level, carries symbolic weight, and observers are quick to analyze the undercurrents behind such decisions. The economic dimension cannot be ignored. Africa is home to some of the fastest-growing markets in the world, RICH in natural resources, emerging industries, and a youthful population eager for opportunities. U.S. engagement in these markets has historically focused on trade partnerships, investment promotion, and fostering stability to create an environment conducive to economic growth. The recall of ambassadors who were key facilitators in these sectors introduces uncertainty for businesses and investors who rely on consistent diplomatic channels to navigate local regulations and establish long-term partnerships. Security considerations add another layer of complexity. Several of the ambassadors were involved in coordinating counterterrorism initiatives, intelligence sharing, and regional peacekeeping efforts. Africa faces numerous security challenges, from insurgencies and organized crime to humanitarian crises exacerbated by conflict. Ambassadors often serve as crucial links between U.S. security agencies and African counterparts, ensuring timely communication and strategic alignment. Their sudden removal potentially leaves a gap in coordination which could be exploited by non-state actors or destabilizing forces. Public perception, both in the United States and in African nations, also plays a pivotal role. Diplomatic recalls are highly visible events that are closely watched by media outlets, political commentators, and local populations. For citizens in the affected countries, the move may raise concerns about the continuity of aid programs, the future of bilateral relations, and the United States' commitment to long-standing partnerships. Meanwhile, within U.S. political discourse, the recalls were debated as either a prudent recalibration of resources or a disruptive decision with unintended consequences. Furthermore, the recall highlights a broader theme in contemporary diplomacy: the tension between domestic political priorities and international obligations. Leaders must balance the expectations of their home constituencies with the nuanced demands of foreign policy. Decisions that appear purely administrative, such as recalling an ambassador, are in fact situated within this intricate web of competing pressures, interests, and long-term strategic goals. Understanding these moves requires not only knowledge of formal policies but also insight into the political, economic, and social currents shaping both the United States and the African continent. The implications of these recalls are far-reaching. They prompt a reassessment of how the U.S. engages with African nations, the mechanisms of accountability and oversight in diplomacy, and the importance of individual ambassadors as agents of influence. For African governments, these changes demand a recalibration of their own diplomatic strategies, adapting to shifts in communication and policy emphasis. For U.S. policymakers, the episode underscores the need for careful planning, transparency, and the recognition that abrupt personnel changes can reverberate across multiple domains: economic, security, and political. This story, however, is not just about political maneuvering. It is also about human relationships, trust, and the subtle art of influence. Ambassadors often spend years cultivating connections, building rapport with local leaders, understanding cultural nuances, and facilitating programs that have real-world impact on communities. When such figures are recalled suddenly, the human dimension of diplomacy, trust, continuity, and personal relationships can be disrupted in ways that formal documents and press releases cannot capture. As the analysis continues, one central question emerges. What does this episode reveal about the broader direction of U.S.-Africa relations? Is it a temporary recalibration, a strategic pivot, or the early indication of a more profound shift in foreign policy priorities? Understanding the significance of ambassadorial recalls requires careful examination of not just the immediate actions, but also the historical context, regional dynamics, and long-term goals of U.S. engagement in Africa. In conclusion, the recall of U.S. ambassadors from Africa under the Trump administration is far more than a bureaucratic shuffle. It is a window into the complexities of modern diplomacy, the intersections of politics and policy, and the delicate balance of influence on a continent of immense strategic importance. Observing the outcomes of these recalls in the coming months will provide valuable insight into how the United States manages its foreign relations, projects power, and navigates the intricate web of economic, political, and security interests that define engagement with Africa today. The ripple effects of recalling U.S. ambassadors in Africa are not confined to political corridors in Washington or embassies in capital cities. They extend to the very heart of regional governance and international cooperation. Countries that had relied on established American diplomats for guidance on trade agreements, infrastructure projects, and security collaborations suddenly found themselves navigating a period of uncertainty. Long-term programs aimed at boosting economic growth, reducing poverty, or combating insurgent activity faced interruptions or delays, and this vacuum posed both challenges and opportunities for local governments and international partners alike. Take, for example, the complex interplay between the United States and West African nations facing security threats. Ambassadors in the region had been instrumental in coordinating counterterrorism initiatives, organizing joint military training exercises, and facilitating intelligence sharing with local agencies. With their sudden departure, communication channels became fragmented, and local officials were left to interpret new directives without the benefit of experienced intermediaries. In a region where timely coordination can mean the difference between peace and escalation, these gaps were far from trivial. Moreover, the recalls prompted African political analysts to reassess how the U.S. might be prioritizing its diplomatic efforts. Some experts suggested that Washington's decisions reflected a strategic shift toward countries with immediate geopolitical or economic importance, potentially leaving smaller or less resource-rich nations with diminished influence in bilateral discussions. The subtle message was unmistakable. Relationships built over years could be reevaluated in an instant based on broader foreign policy recalibrations. Economic implications were particularly significant. African nations are home to rapidly growing markets, abundant natural resources, and emerging technology sectors. U.S. ambassadors often played a key role in facilitating investment opportunities, negotiating trade deals, and connecting American enterprises with local partners. Their recall introduced a degree of hesitation among both multinational corporations and regional entrepreneurs. Investors who rely on clear communication and consistent diplomatic support suddenly faced questions about long-term stability, which could slow the momentum of business ventures and delay development initiatives. Beyond the economic and security considerations, the human element of diplomacy cannot be overstated. Ambassadors serve as personal liaisons, understanding the unique cultural, political, and social dynamics of the countries they are stationed in. The relationships they build with local officials, civil society leaders, and business communities often form the backbone of successful diplomatic engagement. Their absence created a temporary void that impacted negotiations, policy implementations, and even community programs that had been running smoothly under their guidance. This disruption also highlighted the delicate balance between domestic political imperatives in the United States and international commitments abroad. Leaders must juggle multiple priorities, satisfying constituents, addressing budgetary concerns, and responding to shifting global dynamics, all while maintaining consistent diplomatic representation. The recalls became a lens through which to observe this balancing act, demonstrating how decisions made in Washington can reverberate thousands of miles away with immediate consequences. Meanwhile, African leaders were forced to adapt quickly. Ambassadors serve not only as policy executors but also as sounding boards for regional concerns, facilitators of multilateral discussions, and arbiters of conflict resolution. Their temporary absence necessitated the appointment of interim officials, or reliance on existing embassy staff, who often lacked the long-standing relationships or nuanced understanding possessed by the recalled ambassadors. This scenario created both tension and opportunity. While some policy initiatives stalled, local leaders also had the chance to assert greater autonomy in negotiations, recalibrate priorities, and explore alternative partnerships. Media coverage played a crucial role in shaping public perception during this period. Reports emphasized the abruptness of the recalls, analyzed potential reasons behind the moves, and speculated on the long-term consequences for U.S.-Africa relations. For citizens in affected African countries, these reports could engender uncertainty or skepticism about American commitment to local projects, partnerships, and security initiatives. Conversely, for domestic audiences in the United States, the recalls were interpreted in varying ways, some applauding decisive leadership, others questioning the disruption caused to carefully nurtured diplomatic efforts. The episode also illustrates a key concept in modern diplomacy: the symbolic power of personnel decisions. Unlike formal treaties or policy statements, changes in ambassadorial positions send immediate signals to international stakeholders. By recalling specific individuals, Washington effectively communicated a recalibration of priorities, an assertion of oversight, or a shift in strategic focus. These signals are analyzed carefully by foreign governments, investors, and regional organizations, influencing their own planning, alliances, and decision-making processes. Educational and developmental programs were another area affected by these recalls. Many ambassadors had championed initiatives in education, healthcare, and infrastructure development, serving as advocates for funding, technical support, and partnership agreements. Their absence slowed the flow of resources and temporarily disrupted coordination with local institutions, illustrating how individual diplomatic actors can be pivotal in translating foreign policy into tangible outcomes on the ground. Finally, the recalls sparked broader discussions about the long-term strategy of U.S. engagement in Africa. Analysts debated whether this move represented a short-term adjustment or a deeper reorientation of foreign policy priorities. Was the United States signaling a shift toward focusing resources on select countries, or was this part of a broader reevaluation of how to balance domestic political pressures with international responsibilities? Understanding these recalls requires attention not only to the immediate effects, but also to the historical patterns of engagement, regional dynamics, and the strategic goals that continue to shape U.S. foreign policy. In essence, The recall of U.S. ambassadors in Africa under the Trump administration was far from a routine administrative action. It illuminated the interconnected nature of diplomacy, economics, security, and public perception by examining the consequences. On multiple fronts, political, economic, human, and symbolic, we gain a clearer understanding of how personnel decisions can influence international relations in profound ways. The episode also underscores the importance of experienced diplomats, consistent communication, and strategic foresight in maintaining effective foreign engagement. As we continue to analyze the ripple effects, it becomes evident that the impact of these recalls will extend far beyond the immediate months following the announcements. African nations, U.S. policymakers, and international observers are all adapting to this new landscape, making critical decisions that will shape relationships, security strategies, and economic collaborations for years to come. As the recall of U.S. ambassadors continued to reverberate through Africa, the reactions from various governments and local communities offered insight into how deeply these decisions affected the continent. In countries with strategic significance, whether for natural resources, trade routes, or geopolitical influence, the absence of seasoned diplomats created an immediate vacuum. Governments accustomed to regular consultations, guidance, and support from American representatives now face the challenge of recalibrating their own foreign relations and domestic policy priorities. In West Africa, where security concerns have long dominated diplomatic engagement, local authorities reported heightened uncertainty. Ambassadors often served as crucial intermediaries in counterterrorism cooperation, providing not only advice but also acting as trusted links between U.S. intelligence agencies and local security forces. With the sudden withdrawal of these diplomats, coordination slowed, leaving security planners to rely on interim staff or distant communication channels. Analysts warn that even a short-term lapse in communication could embolden extremist factions or disrupt carefully coordinated operations designed to protect civilians and maintain regional stability. Economic ramifications were equally pronounced. Africa's markets are among the fastest growing globally, attracting foreign investment in technology, agriculture, and infrastructure. U.S. ambassadors had long been instrumental in facilitating trade missions, advising on regulations, and connecting American businesses with local partners. Their abrupt departure injected a level of uncertainty into ongoing projects. Investors and corporations began questioning the continuity of support, causing delays in negotiations and, in some cases, a temporary suspension of key deals. The message was clear: while economic potential remained high, political consistency and diplomatic presence were crucial for maintaining confidence in long-term partnerships. Meanwhile, in southern Africa, diplomats had been actively involved in addressing health crises, particularly initiatives targeting infectious diseases and access to essential medical supplies. Their sudden recall created temporary gaps in these programs, necessitating quick adjustments by both local officials and international aid organizations. Community leaders who had relied on ambassadors for advocacy and support now faced new hurdles in securing funding and logistical assistance. While alternative channels were established, the disruption highlighted the indispensable role of experienced diplomats in ensuring the smooth operation of humanitarian programs. Cultural and social influence also came under scrutiny. Ambassadors are not merely political figures. They are cultural liaisons who understand local customs, languages, and social dynamics. Their relationships with community leaders, NGOs, and business networks enable programs that extend beyond traditional diplomacy, including educational initiatives, youth mentorship, and cultural exchanges. The sudden absence of these individuals meant that many of these nuanced programs risked losing momentum, even if temporarily, demonstrating the human dimension of diplomacy that often goes unnoticed. Public perception, both locally and internationally, was another critical factor. Media outlets in Africa covered the recalls extensively, sparking debates about the U.S. commitment to long-term partnerships. For citizens, the decision raised concerns about continuity in areas such as trade, security, and development assistance. Internationally, analysts interpreted the move through multiple lenses. Some viewed it as a strategic recalibration, others as a political maneuver influenced by domestic considerations. The diversity of interpretation underscored how personnel decisions in diplomacy are scrutinized not just for their operational impact, but for the messages they send about intent, reliability, and strategic priorities. Another dimension of the recalls involved the coordination of multilateral initiatives. Ambassadors frequently play a central role in forums involving multiple countries, regional organizations, and international bodies. Their absence can stall negotiations, disrupt planning for summits or conferences, and hinder the formulation of joint policy initiatives. In regions where collaboration across borders is essential for managing trade, environmental concerns, or security challenges, even temporary gaps in leadership and communication can have cascading effects. From the perspective of U.S. foreign policy, the recalls illustrate the balancing act between domestic priorities and international commitments. Decision-makers must weigh the political optics of reshuffling personnel against the tangible effects on relationships abroad. While recalls may serve as tools for asserting oversight or signaling strategic adjustments, they inevitably produce consequences that ripple through economies, security operations, and social programs. The challenge lies in mitigating these effects while pursuing broader policy objectives. At the same time, African leaders had to demonstrate adaptability. The recalls created space for local officials to exercise greater autonomy in negotiations and policy implementation. Some governments seized the opportunity to strengthen regional alliances, engage more deeply with alternative international partners, or accelerate local initiatives that had been dependent on U.S. guidance. In this sense, the recalls highlighted both vulnerability and opportunity. The temporary loss of experienced diplomats required resilience and strategic thinking on the part of local administrations. The scenario also prompted reflection on the broader nature of U.S.-Africa relations. Analysts questioned whether the recalls were indicative of a temporary adjustment or a more profound strategic shift. Were they meant to redirect resources towards specific geopolitical priorities? Were they a response to perceived inefficiencies in existing diplomatic engagement? Or were they primarily symbolic, intended to signal oversight and control over foreign policy execution? Understanding these questions requires attention to historical patterns, the evolving geopolitical landscape, and the long-term objectives of American diplomacy in Africa. Meanwhile, communities directly affected by development programs, trade initiatives, or security partnerships felt the impact on the ground. Schools, healthcare centers, and small businesses that relied on the continuity of youth-supported projects had to adjust rapidly. Local staff often had to fill in gaps left by departing ambassadors, highlighting the essential role that these individuals play in translating high-level policy into real-world outcomes. The disruption underscored the fragility of certain programs in the absence of experienced leadership, even when institutional frameworks remain in place. In conclusion, the third part of this narrative shows that the recall of U.S. ambassadors in Africa had multi-layered consequences. From security and economic disruption to cultural, social, and political ramifications, the move affected nearly every facet of U.S.-Africa relations. It highlighted the indispensable role of diplomats as human conduits of policy, trust, and influence. More importantly, it revealed the delicate interplay between domestic political decisions and international stability, demonstrating that even seemingly administrative actions can carry profound implications for global diplomacy. As we reach the final chapter of this examination of U.S. diplomacy in Africa, it becomes clear that the recall of ambassadors under the Trump administration was more than just a bureaucratic maneuver. It was a turning point that revealed the intricacies, vulnerabilities, and opportunities within international relations. By stepping back and analyzing the broader implications, we can better understand how such decisions influence not only policy, but also perception, trust, and the very fabric of diplomatic engagement. The long-term consequences of these recalls will be felt in multiple arenas. First, there is the political dimension. African governments, accustomed to working with experienced U.S. ambassadors who understood the nuances of their domestic politics, was suddenly forced to navigate a new and uncertain landscape. This transition required rapid adaptation as leaders sought to maintain ongoing initiatives in trade, security, and development while waiting for new appointments. The temporary absence of key diplomats forced both African governments and U.S. policymakers to reassess communication strategies, prioritize pressing matters, and ensure that critical relationships were preserved even amid uncertainty. Security remains a central concern. Several ambassadors had been deeply involved in counterterrorism operations, intelligence sharing, and coordination of regional peacekeeping missions. Their recall created a short-term gap in operational oversight, which had to be filled by interim staff or embassy personnel. While these temporary measures mitigated the risk, the disruption underscored the critical importance of continuity in high-stakes security diplomacy. Threats do not pause because of administrative decisions, and the effectiveness of intelligence networks, response times, and coordination with local forces depends heavily on experienced, trusted personnel. Economically, the recalls introduced both challenges and opportunities. Investors and businesses that relied on the guidance and facilitation of U.S. ambassadors experienced a brief period of uncertainty. Trade negotiations and investment deals, particularly those requiring detailed knowledge of local regulations and market conditions, faced delays. However, this vacuum also prompted local governments to strengthen their own economic initiatives, pursue alternative partnerships, and explore ways to assert greater autonomy in shaping their development trajectories. In some cases, these adaptations led to innovative solutions, increased local engagement, and more diversified international collaborations. The human aspect of diplomacy, often overlooked, was especially evident in the aftermath of these recalls. Ambassadors serve as cultural liaisons, mediators, and trusted intermediaries. Their ability to build relationships, understand local dynamics, and provide guidance to community leaders is difficult to replace. In their absence, staff and officials had to step into roles that demanded both skill and deep understanding. While these transitions were challenging, they highlighted the adaptability of both U.S. Foreign Service personnel and African partners, demonstrating resilience in the face of sudden changes. From a strategic perspective, the recalls also sent symbolic messages that reverberated across the international community. Personnel changes are not merely administrative. They communicate priorities, oversight, and policy intentions. The decision to recall ambassadors signaled that the U.S. was recalibrating its approach, potentially concentrating efforts on regions or issues deemed most critical. For African nations, these signals required careful interpretation. Governments had to gauge whether the recalls indicated a shift in policy focus, a temporary adjustment, or a broader strategic realignment, all while maintaining their own domestic priorities and regional collaborations. Media coverage played a pivotal role in shaping public perception. In Africa, news outlets highlighted concerns about the continuity of U.S. programs, the stability of trade agreements, and the potential impact on security cooperation. Within the United States, analysts debated the wisdom of the recalls, examining the balance between domestic political considerations and international obligations. The widespread discussion underscored the fact that diplomacy is not only about policy execution but also about perception, narrative, and messaging. How decisions are interpreted by both domestic and international audiences can significantly influence their effectiveness. Looking ahead, the recalls provide valuable lessons for both the U.S. and African nations. For U.S. policymakers, the episode reinforces the importance of strategic planning, continuity, and the human element of diplomacy. Experienced diplomats are more than policy executors. They are relationship builders, negotiators, and trusted voices in complex environments. Ensuring that transitions are smooth, communication channels remain open, and priorities are clearly communicated is essential to maintaining influence and credibility abroad. For African governments, the recalls underscore the importance of flexibility, resilience, and self-reliance. By adapting quickly to changes, asserting autonomy, and exploring alternative partnerships, These nations demonstrated the ability to navigate uncertainty while safeguarding critical initiatives. This period of adjustment also provided an opportunity to strengthen regional cooperation, diversify international relationships, and invest in capacity building within local institutions to reduce dependency on external actors. In conclusion, the recall of U.S. ambassadors in Africa serves as a case study in the complex interplay of diplomacy, politics, and human relationships. It illustrates that even seemingly administrative decisions carry profound implications for security, economics, governance, and public perception. By examining the ripple effects across multiple countries, sectors, and communities, we gain insight into the delicate balance of international engagement and the central role played by experienced diplomatic personnel. Ultimately, this episode is a reminder that diplomacy is not merely about policy directives or official statements. It is about trust, continuity, and the ability to navigate complex social, cultural, and political landscapes. The experiences of African nations, combined with the strategic recalibration of the United States, offer lessons that will inform future engagement, strengthen resilience, and shape the trajectory of U.S.-Africa relations for years to come. As we reflect on these events, it becomes evident that the story of U.S. diplomacy in Africa is ongoing. Each decision, personnel change, and policy adjustment contributes to a broader narrative of influence, adaptation, and global interconnectedness. Understanding this dynamic is essential for anyone interested in international relations, political strategy, and the intricate web of factors that govern how nations interact on the global stage. The implications are clear. Diplomacy is as much about people as it is about policy, and the human dimension, the relationships, trust, and personal expertise of ambassadors remains at the heart of effective engagement. By learning from these events, policymakers, governments, and citizens alike can better appreciate the subtle yet profound impact of strategic decisions and the critical importance of maintaining continuity, communication, and collaboration in international affairs.